It's a special gotcha, you know, so that's the way it
Yeah,
is.
right, right. But actually, I'm making good progress on what I wanted to get done.
Great. I love the parking lot pictures. Looks so
Oh, you
much
got
better.
Oh my God. And they did that in a day and a half. And just a cheaper by a 15% to the next bid. And it's just a really nice job.
It makes the place look so much better. I mean, it's
I
just
know.
amazing. I guess the city of Hilliard actually had a point there. So
They did. It was pretty awful. We got away with it as long as we could, but they're doing quite a bit of upgrade of like the houses that were due to the due west of us have been demolished, and they're building something over there, a new commercial project. So the whole area is being spiffed up. So I don't blame them for complaining about us. Next thing I want to do is get the sides of the building where you could see from the picture where the paint is faded. I don't think we have to paint the whole building, but we can paint those areas and make it look a lot better.
All right, we can start now. Why don't you include that in the museum update, Steve? And
I will.
off
Okay.
we go. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to see you again. I'm glad, Dave, that you got everything working. That's you get better at it every month. Want to welcome everybody and thank the New Jersey Antique Radio Club for sponsoring this meeting and providing us with our Zoom feed. We really appreciate it. I'll let Dave say his brief courtesy announcement, and then I'll be back with you.
Hey, I'll just remind everybody to, please keep your microphones muted to keep the audio chaos to a minimum, and also feel free to unmute yourself to ask any questions. Jonathan will let us know if he would like us to hold questions until the end, or if it's okay to hit him in the middle of his presentation. Okay, back to you, Steve.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave. Let's see. I am doing this on my phone, obviously, and I don't have my usual screen view, but is there anybody who is a first-time visitor to this meeting that would like to introduce themselves?
I suppose I am, but I'll be introduced when I give my spiel.
That sounds good. Okay. Anyone else? Well, I guess not. We have old experienced people.
Sound.
I didn't catch that. Was somebody saying something?
Where's the sound?
Who's speaking here?
They just
Someone's just having some
muted
trouble.
themselves.
Can people hear me now?
Yes.
I apologize. I wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Ben Gross. I am the Vice President for Research and Scholarship at the Linda Hall Library in Kansas City and the former consulting curator of the Sarnoff Collection at the College of New Jersey. And I'm thrilled to be able to rejoin a couple of familiar faces from the New Jersey Antique Radio Club.
Hi, Brother Ben.
And say hello to my good friend, Brother Jonathan. Hello.
Thank you. Welcome. Well, I hope you come back to our frequent visitor back to our meetings. I think some of them are pretty interesting. Anybody else? I guess that's a no then. I have someone's icon on the screen. I don't know if someone's trying to talk or what. Dave, are you there?
I'm here. Somebody was having some trouble before, but it looks like they logged out and maybe they just logged
Okay.
back in.
Okay, that explains it. I couldn't figure out if my phone had frozen up or what. I think we have our internet connection problem solved here. So I was hoping it hadn't recurred. Well, let's move along. I'll make a brief announcements for the museum. Tell you guys what's been going on. We already briefly talked a few minutes ago about the new parking lot. For those of you who haven't heard, we got busted by the city of Hilliard with an order to repair our parking lot by October 10th. It desperately needed it. We needed it 5 years ago when we raised some money to do it. Didn't raise enough money to do it, but at that point, the city came along and did a just a superficial coating of the driveway and of the parking lot and made it usable for another couple of years. But it was really looking awful. And the board debated about what to do. It's expensive to redo the parking lot, but it's the right thing to do. So that's what we finally decided to do. And as a result, we have a nice new parking lot. The other thing in terms of improvement at the museum is that we have introduced QR codes on a good number of our items. I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, but it's in place now. We have most of the signs now have QR codes on them that will take you to the web page on our website for that particular item. And about 20 of them have slideshows, and we're adding slideshows as we go along. So, and it's a fairly simple process. Doesn't take much to create them. The goal is to have most of the items in the museum with a slideshow so that the visitor can find out more about them than we have in the signs. The signs we have only have a paragraph about the item. So that's going very well. We also have work going on in the warehouse to put up shelving. We need to reorganize the stuff we have in the warehouse. It's a mess, has been for a while. And putting shelves in will allow us to consolidate things and neaten things up and give us more space for when convention time comes around. Next thing I want to talk about is the sweepstakes. We have 1 week to go before we have to stop selling tickets. We're at about $9,500 now in ticket sales. Now, the last couple of years we've had $11,000, and I think probably we'll reach that. A lot of the ticket sales are in the last week or so. So I'm going to be annoying everybody that's on the mailing list with emails urging you to buy tickets before the deadline. Grand prize is an RCA TRK5 that has the cabinet has been beautifully restored on it, and all the guts are there. Everything is good CRT, perfect restoration candidate. Very, very rare set. Or we have an alternate prize of $8,000 in cash if you decide you don't want to have the TV set. The drawing will be the next week on the 14th at our annual fall swap meet. We've had 50 to 75 people at the last couple of swap meets we have. Hope we do better this time. Blake Hinkle has been taking the lead on this. And it'll be from 10 to 2 in our new parking lot. No charge for admission, either to sell or to buy. And bring your own tables, because we have a very limited number of tables for that purpose. Memberships keep growing slowly. I think we're at 185 now. Donations are coming in. We're doing just fine. So that's my museum report. Anybody have any comments or questions? Yeah, I guess not. Then let's move on to the item that I picked. I didn't have time to publicize this, or didn't get around to publicizing it, but what I'm going to cover today is one of the replicas that we have. We have several replicas, but this one is particularly interesting. It's of the General Electric Octagon. Now, let me see if I can reverse the. No, that's not the right button. Trying to see how to turn this thing to the other screen, but I don't see an icon for it. Well, I have to do it with the camera backwards, then it'll work. The Octagon is in our lobby.
Yep, there you go. We see it.
And there it is. Many of you may know that can you see it?
Yes.
Everybody, okay, good. The Octagon was one of the very earliest mechanical sets made by GE in Schenectady. They were one of the pioneers in mechanical broadcasting, and they built. Nobody knows how many of these, but less than 100, I would imagine, to test mechanical television. And their claim to fame is that they were the first ones to do a drama on television. Now, there's some argument about that. There may have been something in England first, but first one in the US for sure to do an actual play on television. It was very crude. The switching from what they had more than one camera, and remember at that time the cameras were flying spot cameras, and they had a crude switching system that allowed them to go from one camera to the other. It was called the Queen's Messenger. It's interesting. A couple of years ago, somebody recreated that show and produced it as a play, which was very, very crudely done. No film exists, I don't think, of the actual production. But back to the Octagon. This is not a real Octagon. This is a replica that, as nearly as we can tell, was made in the 50s when GE was celebrating some anniversary of their entry into television. And they made a number of these for to give to their dealers around the country. And again, we don't know how many were made, but a relatively small quantity. And it'll turn it around. Every part in here was copied. Now, like this motor, for instance, is not a real motor. Apparently what they did was took a real Octagon and made molds of all the components, and then made these are metal, and then they cast these this fake motor. Here's where the neon went. All of this was cast from original components, even down to the knobs, which I would think they would be able to find, but they didn't. They cast their own from the replica, from the original one that they had. Now, as far as I know, and the disc is authentic, has it's the same design as I've looked at an original Octagon, and it's very very similar. Now, the case, I don't think this is accurate, but it's similar to what was originally in use. And it's sort of interesting that this one, when we got it, came with a magnifying lens. We've had the face of this refinished because it was in really bad shape. And this magnifying lens mounted on there. Now, I haven't seen a picture of an octagon with a lens like this. So how it got on this replica and why, I have no clue. But interesting set. I wish we had one of the originals, but there's only one that I know of. It's in a private collection. The rest are all in museums. There's a story. We were tracking one down several years ago from a guy in California that had one, and he had just taken it to a recycling center. He had no idea what it was, and I can't remember how we found out about it, but we got a hold of this guy, and he said, "Boy, I just took that to the so-and-so center yesterday or the day before." So we frantically called the recycling center to find out if it was still around, and it wasn't. It had been smashed. So we missed by a day getting one. It's probably the rarest of the American mechanical sets. So that's all I've got to say about it. Anybody have any questions or comments?
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah.
I saw one at the Henry Ford years ago, and now you've got me wondering if that was an original or a replica.
At Henry Ford?
Yes.
I think that's an original octagon at Henry Ford. Yeah.
Okay. And the interesting thing about that one was that the scanning disc had square holes.
Right. This one does too. I think probably they're more efficient. They allow more light through for their size for a given resolution, but they're much harder to make. Round holes, all you just need a drill, and make a square one. You've got to have a punch that does it in a very precision way. That's my understanding why that wasn't done more often.
I want to say something about the holes. Another problem with square holes is that you have to center the base of the square hole on the center of the disc, or it won't scan right. And there also is an overlap. They always say they want to reduce the overlap because the picture is sharper with the square hole, but they don't overlap properly because the picture isn't square. The picture is wedge shaped, which would be like a pie cut on the disc. So that's a mistake too. And many times the US disc, what they did was they would just enlarge the disc and they would get an even coverage of light over the frame by doing that. And I don't think that's a bad way to do it. It's supposed to be not as sharp, but if you get a satisfying picture of it, out of it, that's really a moot point. People have tried to make wedge-shaped disc holes too. That was something that von Mihaly did in Germany. The problem there is that each successive row of holes, as you go down towards the center of the disc, would have to be smaller than the previous ones. And there's no way they're going to do that. So you still get some overlap and you wind up at the bottom with a lower resolution as you go towards the center of the disc. I haven't seen this any place in the literature, but it's true. Another problem is if you have a stereo disc like Baird used in England, one eye is going to see a lower resolution image than the other one because one of the spirals of holes will be closer to the center of the disc.
I have a quick question. When was the original octagon built or introduced?
1928.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have another question about that one. Peter Yancer used to have an argument with most of the histories that said that that was a 24-hole disc that they used in the Queen's Messenger. And he thought he saw an example and counted the holes and there were 48, which would be more logical. You get a much better image. And I was wondering if the disc that you have, which you say is a replica, but it might be, the disc part might be a good copy. Does that have 48 or 24 holes?
It's 48.
So you settled the
Yeah,
problem.
I think that says that it was done with, I think they started with 24 holes, and probably by the time they did the Queen's Messenger, they'd moved to 48.
I think they might have even moved to 48 when they did the telecast, the historic telecast of Al Smith.
Right.
If you've heard about it. I think that was 48 also. I think they dropped 24 a long time before that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Thank you.
Steve, is the replica possibly operable on one of Daryl's converters?
No, not with a fake motor.
Yeah, that kind of, why would they do a fake motor, or could a motor be reinstalled?
A motor could easily be reinstalled, and I would imagine if they had wanted to do this, they could have sourced in the 50s a motor that was identical, because motor technology, you can get old motors are everywhere. So I think they probably could have found an old motor that was like the original, just as they could have found the original knobs, but instead they decided they just turned this over to one guy who said, okay, we're gonna just make molds of everything.
So is the artifact worth less if you were to put a real motor in there? Or is, that's the quandary that you always have with repairing old radios and TVs.
Right.
Is even if you insert like an old capacitor, you open it up and you put a new capacitor inside, then somebody that's a historian in 100 years is going to look at that and get the wrong impression.
Right.
Worth more as a non-working artifact or as a working artifact?
That's a ongoing discussion. If you talk to the antique car people, they'll tell you that one of the most important things is if you got an antique car, you get it running. And that may require some compromises in what you put in it. But you talk to an antique furniture guy, and he'll tell you that anything you do to the furniture is a travesty and detracts from its value.
That's crazy. One of the values of your museum to me is that you have so many working things there, and that's valuable as an experience that you can share. Without that, you don't have the experience.
Right. That's our attitude. One of the things that we had a discussion about this with, I think it was with Alex Magoon was a guest a while back. And he talked about this issue, and to him, the thing was, if you're going to do modifications, make something work, be sure to document what was there originally before you start doing anything. So that answers your question. The historian in the future can look and see what was actually originally there.
Thank you for your...
by the 1950s, there was no signal source for a 48 line television program. Maybe they figured nobody would ever notice that the motor was a fake.
Right. Yeah.
And GE probably made that motor too. It looks like one that goes on a fan or all kinds of other stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I really think it doesn't matter the value. I mean, people get all hung up on the value of this stuff. Who cares? It's just, It's an artifact. It's a piece of history. I think that's what's important. Its value, if it's $12 or $12,000, does it really matter? It's going to be in the museum. I've looked at that thing forever, every time I've gone in the museum, and I did not realize it was a reproduction. It looks pretty authentic to me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yeah, I
One
can.
thing that some of the radio people that have used QR codes on stuff have also included in the pages that they put on the restoration work that was done on an object too. So something for you in the future, that might be a good idea to add that in.
I think that's a great idea. We're just doing sort of basic stuff just to get some information. And I mean, there are all kinds of things that I'd like to include. like that, and you know, video clips and things like that. And over time, you know, maybe we get a volunteer that wants to do it. There are all kinds of possibilities there. I think that's a great idea.
Hey guys, I got something to say. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Yeah, I think we need to make a distinction between the monetary value and the historical value of an item. I think those two are being confused.
Good point.
Because yeah, when somebody says value, historical value is important too, but it's you know, the monetary value, that shouldn't be the most important thing.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
I think the historical value is way more important than monetary value, because this stuff's not going anywhere. At least I hope it's not. So really, who cares? And you sure don't want the tax collector to think this is worth billions of dollars or something. But I know the museum's a nonprofit, so that's not an issue, but it could be.
And you know, the monetary, you mentioned the monetary value, the prices of these things just varies dramatically. A few years back, there were 2 or 3 wealthy people that were trying to build collections. And so they drove the prices of pre-war sets in particular just through the roof. Now they're way down, you know, and someday they may be worthless, you know, who knows, from a monetary standpoint. Any other comments? Well, if not, let's turn this over to Jonathan for our main event.
Okay, friends, I'm going to try to get this screen sharing thing to work again, if I'm very lucky.
Hey, Jonathan, just to remind you, you were going to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, I am, as soon as I get the screen up here.
Ah, okay.
We got it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you do? Okay. First of all, my name is Jonathan Allen. By trade, I'm a physicist, but I got drafted to be a sort of an advisor and volunteer at the Sarnoff Museum. I had to, it was under the direction of the art department, and because the art department does that kind of thing, but they needed someone who could handle the technical side, like restoring artifacts, documenting them, and that sort of thing. So that's how I got into this business with the Sarnoff Museum. That was 10 years ago. Anyway, I'd like to get started, if I might, and I'll fill in stuff afterwards. If you have questions and they're really urgent, for instance, if I make a statement that's incorrect, you better nail it. But other than that, maybe we should do the discussion at the end, because I've kind of got a script here. So if you don't mind, I'll get started, okay? Now, the Sarnoff collection, as it's called, commemorates the life of David Sarnoff and the Radio Corporation of America, of which he was chief for most of its history. It's located at the College of New Jersey, TCNJ, in central New Jersey, not too far from Trenton, in Ewing. And in the course of my talk, I'll explain to you how this place got into business. Let's start with David Sarnoff. David was born in 1891 to a Jewish family in Minsk, which is now part of Belarus. He emigrated with his family to New York City in 1900 when he was just a kid, 9 years old. And he went to school, and after school hours, he helped support his family by selling Yiddish newspapers on the streets of New York. And we have the Sarnoff family when they came over. And this is a photo that was taken then, obviously. And if you look at it, it demonstrates a fundamental principle of group photography. Whenever you have a group, there's always one person who moves while the shutter is open. All right. I believe this eldest kid is David. All right. Anyway, here he is a little older and wearing his bow tie, so he looks elegant and all of that. Unfortunately, at the age of 15, his father caught tuberculosis and became incapacitated. So at that age, David had to drop out of school to work full time. And he worked at a number of jobs until he sort of ended up at the American Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company in 1906. And this was the start of a 60-year career in radio and related fields. Although he was just an office boy, he was fascinated by the technology, and he got himself a telegraph key and sounder, and he practiced Morse code on his own until he became quite a capable operator. For the next 13 years, he climbed up from office boy to commercial manager, and he studied both the technology and the business side of the corporation. He also served as a wireless operator, both on ships and on shore stations. Perhaps the best known job that he had was as an operator for a station that was owned by the Marconi Company, but it was located at the top floor of the Wanamaker department store in New York City. Wanamaker was a competitor of Macy's. Anyway, the store wanted to show that it was up with the newest technology, so they invited the Marconi Company to build their station there. And it engaged in general communication, but also it serves a link by which the New York store could communicate with the Wanamaker headquarters, which was located in Philadelphia, somewhat to the south. The big event was on April 15th, 1912, the morning after the Titanic struck the iceberg. David reported for work, and along with two junior operators, they spent 3 days handling communications associated with the disaster. We have his telegraph key here, and if you look at how fat the contacts are, it makes sense, because this, unlike in a vacuum tube set, this actually controlled the full power to the coil that generated the spark signal. Anyway, they communicated with ships that were searching for survivors. They got the names of the survivors and other vital communication. They shared the information with the press as necessary, and kept at it for 3 days, which was quite some endurance. Now, although there were many other wireless stations, Sarnoff thereafter boasted he was the sole operator. Now, one thing that came from the Titanic disaster, largely because it drowned so many very important people, was it showed how essential wireless was to maritime safety. And it led to new regulations and standards, including a requirement that shipboard stations should be manned round the clock. Now, this was a real boom for the Marconi Company, which had the contracts to operate these stations on the ships. The stations were not operated by the ship's crew. They were franchises to the Marconi Company. So within the Marconi Company, based on his heroic behavior on that occasion, he worked his way up through the American Marconi ranks, and he earned his operator's license, which this was issued in 1913. And during this period, radio itself was evolving. Lee DeForest and his successors, Harold Arnold at AT&T and Irvin Langmuir improved the DeForest Audion. For one thing, the original Audion sucked, or rather it didn't, because it had a poor vacuum. There was as much conduction by ionization as there was by actual electron transfer. So they made tubes with higher vacuum and with the grid much closer to the cathode, to the filament, so that they could better control the space charge. So with practical vacuum tubes, radio technology vastly improved. More importantly, tubes, unlike sparks, could generate clean RF, sinusoidal RF, which was capable of voice transmission. So at the Sarnoff, we have a turntable with an assortment of relevant vacuum tubes. We start with an Audion, not unlike the ones that DeForest made, and we move on to other types, which are arranged in a compromise of going around here of historical and chronological order, or rather evolutionary and chronological order. We also have in our collection a water-cooled VHF vacuum tube, which was used in final amplifiers of television transmitters in later years. Now, when World War I came about, it proved the vital importance of wireless for military communications. So at the end of the war, the government decided that such a resource should not be under the control of a foreign company such as British Marconi. Even though Britain was an ally and a friend, it was still another country. And from a sort of nationalistic point of view, they decided that it had to be under the control. American radio must be under the control of an American company. So this led to the creation of the Radio Corporation of America as a division of General Electric, but it soon became its own corporation, in which Sarnoff started working his way up the ranks. And as such, he became fascinated with and pushed the idea of broadcasting. People sometimes use the word broadcasting and communication interchangeable, but they are not. Communication usually implies one sender and one receiver, or at least a very small number of receivers, and it's often two-way. Broadcasting actually comes from agriculture, where a farmer, instead of planting the seeds one by one by one in a row, has a basket or sack and casts the seeds broadly over the field. Hence broadcasting. So in 1921, under Sarnoff's encouragement, RCA, with collaboration of hams and some commercial operators, broadcast the boxing match between Jack Dempsey and Georges Charpentier, a very important championship. And it was, people could listen to it by going into auditoriums and theaters which had receivers in them. Anyway, this headline event demonstrated broadcasting to the industry and to the public. So to support its broadcasting, which they now realize was real business, RCA started making radio receivers for home use. They began with TRFs, tuned radio frequency sets, and then based on the inventions of Edwin Armstrong, introduced the regenerative and the superheterodyne. Within the next 3 years, RCA had sold more than $80 million worth of receiving sets. And here we have an early radio. This is the Areola Senior, which is a one-tube set built in 1921. And you can see the tube there with its head sticking up a little bit through the front panel. Here you have your tuning control, a rheostat to control the filament to the tube, etc. Here's a radio. Notice this one's called the Areola. Then they changed the name, which persisted for a long time, called Radiola. And this is the Radiola 2. It also works with headphones and is battery powered. Somewhat later, the Radiola 20. And you can see it has on the top, I don't show the whole height of it, a loop antenna, which you can rotate in order to home in on the station you're trying to listen to. And this gives you a stronger signal from the station you want, yet suppresses interference from other stations, which are off in different directions, even though they may be close to the frequency you want to listen to. This is a Radiola 26, which is a portable. Any question whether it's a portable? Absolutely not. See, it's got a handle on the top. That makes it a portable. I think we have a photo of somewhere of Edwin Armstrong on the beach with his wife playing the radio. A very similar one to this. Here's a Radiola 60, which is super heterodyne. Regrettably, a previous owner of this set painted the black over what otherwise was a beautiful natural wood cabinet. I hope he's burning in hell for that one. We're going to, when we get a chance, we are going to refinish the cabinet or have it done by a professional. And finally, we have a radio console, which was built in 1937. It's a very basic superhet. Signal goes straight into a pentagrid converter, one IF stage, second detector, and then audio out. But we have it playing whenever the museum is open. We have an iPod with recordings of early radio programs from the 1940s, consisting of commercials, some wartime propaganda, some radio dramas. And those go into a one-tube phono oscillator. So the signal actually travels through the air, maybe a half a meter or something, before it actually enters the antenna of the radio. And traditionally, before the pandemic, we would every year around Halloween play that War of the Worlds famous broadcast through this set to an audience that would gather at the museum. In 1929, RCA bought out the Victor Talking Machine Company of Camden, New Jersey. And we have in our collection a Victrola. Ola was a name that was used in a lot of audio related equipment. Moviola, Victrola, Radiola, etc. They combined the names of the company to form RCA Victor. The advantages of this were that RCA gained access to the huge manufacturing facility of the Victor company in Camden. And also the phonograph industry gained access to vacuum tube amplification, which was useful both in recording and in reproduction. RCA also acquired the trademark of Little Nipper, which I'm sure we've all seen. By the way, in the previous phonograph, the horn is inside the cabinet, and you can control the volume by swinging those doors. Here, in this picture of the set, the horn is external. And by the way, to control the volume on this, you know what you did? You balled up a sock or a pair of socks and shoved it down the horn. And that's what the origin of the term, put a sock in it, when you want somebody to quiet down. So the slogan was his master's voice, suggesting that the audio quality was such that the dog could not discriminate between the recording and his real master. And I guess that was the origin of the more modern slogan, is it live or is it Memorex? Now, combining the electronic arts, many of the new phonographs included radios. And here we have a radio phonograph. And by the way, around this time also, radios started having, this was about 1946, this was made. About this time, radios started having a jack available on the back. So if you had a separate turntable, you could plug it into the radio and use its amplification to make your sound come out. And that's how the connector, which we now call the RCA connector, came into existence. Now, in 1930, David Sarnoff became the president of RCA and later chairman of the board, positions he held for the rest of his career. So after Sarnoff's success with radio, hey, if we can transmit sound, maybe we can transmit pictures. So the attention turned to television. Now, as we discussed earlier in this meeting, mechanical TV sets had been demonstrated since before World War I, but they lacked the picture quality and reliability needed to serve as a public medium. Now, in 1929, Sarnoff met with Vladimir Zworykin, who had been trying to develop all electronic television at Westinghouse. Philo Farnsworth had invented the image dissector camera tube. So Zworykin dissected it basically, dissected the image dissector, if you will, and made his own versions of the invention, leading to a new camera tube called the iconoscope. And it was a substantial improvement over the image dissector. One fundamental difference is that the image dissector, the electron beam scans the photoelectric surface and collects the electrons only while the beam is actually on the pixel that it's scanning. Whereas on the iconoscope, the charge accumulates on the pixel until the next time the beam hits it. So theoretically, your sensitivity increases by a factor equal to the number of pixels that form the whole frame. Now, there was some dispute over patent rights. That was a constant ruckus in the early days of radio and television. Westinghouse, however, decided not to pursue TV and transferred the work and Zworykin to RCA, where Sarnoff welcomed them both. The next big public event was when Sarnoff demonstrated television and television broadcasting at the New York World's Fair. And here we have Sarnoff standing before a podium, looking into the TV camera, and the picture was available on receivers throughout that pavilion at the World's Fair. And it was also broadcast to some nearby locations. I believe there was also a setup where guests could stand in front of a camera and see their own images on a receiver. Now, patents were a major part of RCA's business, and Sarnoff was very jealous of what he perceived to be infringements. But sometimes it went the other way, and this led to complicated lawsuits. One of the more famous or infamous was with Farnsworth. And after a 7-year battle, RCA lost the case and had to pay royalties to Farnsworth for technologies that were based on his inventions. Another even better known battle occurred a few years later. I'm stepping a little bit out of my time sequence here, and that was with Edwin Armstrong over electronic frequency modulation. This electronic frequency modulation took over from some earlier attempts using the wobulator, which you may be familiar with. Even though the two men had been friends and collaborators, things turned sour. Armstrong sued RCA to defend his patents, but by dragging it out through a years-long battle of attrition, Armstrong eventually went broke. His life fell apart. He split up with his wife. In 1954, he reached the end when he committed suicide by jumping out of a window. But let's go back to a little bit of the better stuff. Under Sarnoff's leadership, oh, by the way, when one of the employees at RCA informed Sarnoff of what had happened to Armstrong, Sarnoff said, "I did not kill Armstrong." "Oh, yes, buddy, you did." But back to the better stuff. Under Sarnoff's leadership, RCA built its huge lab near Princeton, New Jersey, actually the town of Princeton Junction. And here we have an aerial Here we have an aerial photo of the Sarnoff, of the RCA lab, which later became the RCA Sarnoff lab. And you can see it's quite a big place. It still looks pretty much the same, by the way. The main reasons for that location were, first of all, it was about halfway between the NBC studios and Radio City in New York, and the manufacturing facilities, which, as I told you before, were in Camden to the south. Secondly, it was very close to Princeton University, where they hoped that they could draw on some of the scientific and engineering talent. Now, when World War II broke out, Sarnoff expressed his gratitude for the welcome he had received into the U.S. The U.S. at that time, actually, when he came over, was actually quite hospitable to immigrants. And the benefits, the huge benefits he had enjoyed in the U.S., which we today would call the American dream. He also grasped the consequences to himself and his family if the Nazis were to win the war. He therefore volunteered as a reserve officer in charge of Army communications for General Eisenhower. And during the war, RCA turned virtually all of its research and manufacturing to support of the war effort. Among the better known creations was the communications receiver called the AR-88. And here we have one. It works. It has it's quite a sophisticated set. It has 2 TRF stages ahead of the converter. And then I think either 3 or 4 IF stages, obviously beat frequency oscillator for CW listening, and later single sideband. And it also then has the second detector and audio. It has variable selectivity, and it's extreme. It also is extremely clean in that the cabinet, the TRF stages and the shielded cabinet prevent any leakage of the local oscillator getting out, because if it did, it would cause interference with other sets nearby, and in certain combat conditions might even give a clue to the enemy that the set was playing. The AR-88 was adopted by both the U.S. forces and by the Allies through Lend-Lease. And it instantly became the favorite of the code breakers at Bletchley Park in England. Because you can be the best code breaker, but if you can't pull the enemy signals out of the ether, it ain't going to do you any good. Also, near the end of the war, RCA worked on a sophisticated weapon, a TV-guided bomb, apparently a glide bomb, which was guided by radio control, and which used television to send back its forward view to the bombardier on the airplane that launched it, so he could control its flight. The idea was even the computerized bomb sight, like the Norden, was not perfect, because let's say you're flying at 30,000 feet, and you know what the wind is there by your drift, and you may know what the wind speed is at the ground, but say between 10,000 and 20,000 feet, there's a very strong wind blowing in some direction that you don't know about. You're going to miss. Whereas this, you could correct and hit the target, presumably exactly. Unfortunately, it went into use a little too late in the war to be of a significant contribution. The latter models, the earlier models, used iconoscopes, but the latter employed a newly invented camera tube, the image orthicon. The image orthicon exploited electron multiplication, which had been developed for the photomultiplier, giving it a noiseless gain of hundreds of thousands. And here we have an exhibit of a studio camera image orthicon. And you can see here's the image section where the electrons are generated by the photoelectric effect, Einstein Zeitungsphysik 1905. Got to say that because I'm a physicist. And then the electrons are accelerated, say hit another cathode where they generate more electrons, and then the electron multiplication stages are down over here. Here's a small, more compact image orthicon, which is similar to those that may have been used in the glide bomb. And here we have an early cathode ray tube, And you can see it's round and it appears to be electrostatically deflected rather than magnetically, and hence the very acute angle. After the war, the image orthicon became a standard for TV studio cameras. And by the way, another little piece of etymology. Image orthicon is kind of a long name, so they shortened it to IMMY for short. And then when the trophy was created for achievements in television arts and sciences, they feminized it to match the female form of the figure, and they called it the Emmy. And that's where the name of the Emmy comes from. Over the years, RCA developed numerous other camera tubes besides the image orthicon. There were Vidicons, and there were Plumicons, each of which had evolutionary advantages. For his contributions to the war effort, the Army gave David Sarnoff the rank of Brigadier General, and for the rest of his life, he insisted on being addressed as General. And here he is in his Army uniform with his decorations and all of that as the General. The end of the war also turned RCA back to predominantly civilian electronics, although they continued to build military equipment, such as the ANGRC-13 transceiver. This was made for the Navy, and as I understand it, it was used by forward observers. So for instance, when the battleship was going to bombard a shore target, they would sneak a sailor ashore with one of these guys, and he would be able to see the target, see where the shells were landing, and send correcting information back to the ship. Bit of a dangerous job because you are transmitting radio, and there's a good chance you're going to get captured by the enemy, or even worse, you might get smacked with one of your own 16-inch shells, and that could really spoil your day. Anyway, getting back to television, though, which is your racket, at the end of the war, the FCC adopted the NTSC, National Television Systems Committee standard for TV broadcasting. And in 1946, RCA started selling home TV sets, such as the 8-inch 621 TS, the 10-inch 630 TS, and a couple of years later, in 1948, the 10-inch 8TS30, which became enormously popular. And you can see that one is playing. And if you dim the lights a little bit, you can see there is Groucho Marx. You bet your life. Well, with selling so many sets to homes, RCA needed to be able to service them. So they introduced a network of service shops and a line of test equipment, which was issued to their servicemen, but also could be purchased by anyone who wanted to buy it. Oh, I'm sorry. Here's another television set I didn't show. Sorry. Here's another television set which, following the tradition of the earlier stuff, combines the TV with a phonograph and an AM/FM radio. Based on RCA's mastery of electron optics, that is generating, focusing, deflecting, and detecting electron beams, the company carried its art of electron optics to introducing one of the first commercial electron microscopes. This was in the 1940s, and unfortunately, we can't operate this because it would require vacuum pumps and all of that kind of thing, because the electron beam would not travel successfully through air. The electrons would scatter off air molecules. So the subject, the specimen has to be in a vacuum. But because the de Broglie wavelength of an electron accelerated through thousands of volts is less than 1,000th that of the of visible light, you can see objects that are orders of magnitude smaller than is possible with a light microscope. Anyway, anticipating the need to maintain their customers' TV sets, RCA introduced a network. Oh yes, here's a line of test equipment. I'm sorry, I got to keep those slides out of order there. Here is the picture tube tester, the senior volt ohmist vacuum tube voltmeter. They also had a junior volt ohmist, which was more compact that a serviceman could carry with him. And a compact little oscilloscope. It ain't a Tektronix, but it's still a decent scope for TV servicing. They also set up academies to train service technicians, and they advertised their availability with this poster about Mr. Fix-It, who would come to, because the TVs were pretty bulky, the preferred way of servicing them was to come to the customer's house and try to fix it there, and only in dire circumstances would you, quote, pull the set, unquote. And he would carry his tube caddy. The tube caddy also had room for some basic tools and test equipment. Almost immediately, manufacturers began to work on the next phase of evolution, which was color. A key invention was a 3-electron gun shadow mask cathode ray tube. And this is the first prototype color picture tube. Although the FCC initially approved the CBS electromechanical color wheel system, RCA, led by Sarnoff's determination, fought court battles all the way to the US Supreme Court to accept RCA's all-electronic system. And in 1952, the NTSC reorganized and adopted the RCA system, which prevailed until recently when we switched to digital. The RCA system had the advantage of being both forward and reverse compatible. That is, if you had a black and white set, you could watch color shows, albeit in black and white. And if you had a color set, you could watch black and white broadcasts, because in the beginning of color, only a minority of broadcasts were in color. And you didn't have to change anything. It just automatically adapted. Also, by the way, when you think about the CBS color wheel system, imagine a color wheel big enough to accommodate a 24-inch or larger screen. Not very practical. So the first commercial color set based on RCA's all-electronic system was the CT100, which was introduced in 1954. And it was very expensive. Only the rich could afford it, but it was the first color set. Sarnoff, for his work on color TV, Sarnoff received the Emmy for 1961-62. Now, as you know, the Emmy is given by the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. The arts part is held in a grand hall with bands playing and spotlights, and, fancy exhibits, whereas the science one is usually held in somebody's basement, and they invite the family of the winner to show up. In 1967, during the latter years, David Sarnoff established the Sarnoff Library and Museum in the RCA Sarnoff Labs near Princeton. Initially, it was really a trophy room to exhibit his prizes and show off his achievements. And here we have the Sarnoff wall in our museum, pretty much as we believe it was originally. You can see that photo there, which you saw in the beginning. And here's a picture of him with a whole bunch of famous people at the opening of a transatlantic radio station. Here's his telegraph key. And here's his military hat, his Emmy, his face on the cover of Time magazine, and autograph photos from the big shots of the time, like Sir Winston Churchill, President Truman, General Eisenhower, and President John Kennedy. And here you have a bust of Sarnoff. But over time, the museum expanded and into a more general exhibit hall, And this is what we have now at the College of New Jersey, and I'll get a little later into how it moved. Now, Sarnoff eventually retired in 1970 at the age of 79, appointing his son, Robert Sarnoff, as a new chief. David then died the following year, leaving Robert completely in charge. Now, under Robert's management, RCA did accomplish some important technical research. One project was an early attempt to build a flat screen television. And given that color was already considered standard, it had to be color. So they needed to have colored LEDs. They had red ones and they had green ones, but no blue ones. A blue one was very difficult because you needed a semiconductor whose band gap matched the higher photon energy of blue light. But in 1972 and 73, Jacques Pankov and Herbert Marushka demonstrated the world's first blue LED. But due to difficulty of doping gallium nitride, which is a semiconductor of choice, it was not efficient enough for commercial use. You can see the little LED up here, and we actually lit it up and made a film for that was put on YouTube, and so the modern blue LED was invented in 1997 and won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2014. It was that year that we did the demonstration of this. We contacted Mr. Marushka, who was living in Florida at the time, and he coached us on what kind of voltages and currents the LED would like. And by the way, the blue LED is the basis of virtually all of today's LED lamps, because it uses phosphors to convert some of the blue light to the longer wavelength colors. RCA also at this time got into solid state semiconductor electronics. And this included discrete, analog, digital, and microprocessor circuits. And you have just some discretes, microprocessors, and here are a whole range of integrated circuits. They also demonstrated, just to show that it could be done, an all transistor television set, except for the CRT. They hadn't yet licked that problem, and they actually didn't during their active history. But this is the all transistor black and white television, and the only vacuum tube is the CRT itself. As the 1970s progressed, RCA's near monopoly started to fade. There were some antitrust problems, but the real one, the main one, was competition from foreign companies, such as Sony, Philips, and Matsushita. The second was, unfortunately, David did not have Daddy's management skills or judgment of what would be a good investment and what would not. And he sought to expand RCA into areas for which it was not really suited, including, for example, Hertz Rent-A-Car. Also, even within electronics, he decided to compete with a little backroom computer outfit known as International Business Machines, IBM, and you can guess how well that worked. He also wasted resources with symbolic stuff, like changing the logo from the good old meatball to this new modern text form of RCA initials. Probably the biggest economic disaster was the capacitive video disc known as Selectavision. And here we have a machine that actually finally was made. It sounded like a good idea when David Sarnoff himself had first proposed it and started the project. But it took so long to develop, almost all of it under Junior's supervision, that Betamax and VHS videotapes had already seized the market. Now, the idea was that that Selectavision would use discs basically like phonograph discs. In fact, the method of pressing them was very similar. The signal was not collected optically by laser or something of that sort. It was capacitive. It was Hill and Dale, Edison style recording at a microscopic scale, and you sense the hills and dales by capacitance. When the stylus was passing over a hill, capacitance was maximum. Over a valley, capacitance was minimum, and this modulated a UHF RF signal, which then carried the information for the audio and video. The records which were 12 inches in diameter, but lived in a case such that to load it, you shove the case into this slot in the machine, pull the case out, the record was captured, it would play, and when you were all done, you'd slip the case in, it would seize the record, and you'd pull it out. That way there was no chance that you touch this microscopic groove record with your sweaty hands and ruin it. And the idea was that to get copyrights and be able to reproduce movies. But even though it looked like the market was not going to work, and even in spite of the huge difficulties, Robert still kept funding the capacitive video disc, plowing millions of dollars into a doomed technology. There was another problem, which was not so technological as audience related. If you have a piece of music you really like, and you have it on a record, you can enjoy the record many, many times. Perhaps not so much with a movie. And if it's a whodunit, and you already know whodunit, it does considerably detract from the suspense. They came up with the idea eventually of a lending library like Blockbuster, but it was too late. The ship had already sunk. In its very last years, RCA did finally market VHS, including a camcorder, incidentally, with an RCA invented charge coupled device, CCD sensor. And here is a VHS camcorder. And finally, around this time, they experimented with amorphous silicon, and they found out that it had a photovoltaic effect and could be used to make solar panels, but RCA was not interested in developing it. So a couple of spin-off companies did. Cronar, for which I worked for quite a few years, and also another company called SolarX. In 1986, RCA had deteriorated to the point where GE just reacquired it for peanuts. They basically shut it down, but continued to license the trademark. Since GE had its research lab in Schenectady, New York, it didn't need another in Princeton Junction, New Jersey. So it gave the facility to Stanford Research Institute. They soon decided that they no longer wanted to maintain the Sarnoff Museum, so they gave the artifacts to the College of New Jersey, where it was now. I had hoped to give this talk from the museum itself, but some complications occurred in trying to coordinate with the college's audiovisual department. So I'm now giving it from home, unfortunately. But I took photos of all the important stuff. The papers and books mainly went to the Hagley Museum in Delaware. Over the past 10 years that I've worked as a volunteer at Sarnoff, we have not only added to the historical artifacts, but we have built demonstration circuits to support instructive programs and lectures. Here we have a triode demonstration. And here we have a triode tube. You can actually see it glowing. And the left meter shows the negative voltage you're applying to the grid. And the right meter shows the plate current that results. And by turning the knob, the operator or the student can see the relationship between grid current, grid voltage, and plate current, hence the transconductance of the tube. And giving deference to the more modern technology, this is a very similar circuit with a MOSFET transistor, which lives right over here. Otherwise, very similar setup. We also received a TV from the early 1950s that was in whose cabinet was in really rough shape. So we made it into an open TV. You can see it from behind. You can see all the components, even the high voltage cage is open. By the way, it works. It's been recapped and restored to the extent that it actually works. And obviously something most of you probably know, the reason why television, why TV and other such screens are sized by the diagonal is because the original screens were circular. And if you inscribe a rectangle into a circle, the diameter of the circle is equal to the diagonal of the rectangle. But I'm sure as TV guys, you already know that. And then on the table next to the set would sit some drawings that show the layout of the major components and a block diagram showing how the signal progresses from the antenna through all the electronics and out the outputs of the cathode ray tube and the loudspeaker. Actually, there are advantages to the museum being on a college campus because the museum enhances the engineering and history departments and also the arts and communication department over which it's in charge. We also give workshops to teach soldering and other skills to both the college students and off-campus guests. So that's the way the museum is now, and I welcome any questions. Let me unshare and go back to something more normal.
I've got to jump in right away. I know you have constraints as to how much you could fit in, but I'd like you to add a line after Armstrong about his wife, Marion, vindicating him on every patent. They kept all the court proceedings going, and his fortune and his reputation was certainly restored, including the lawsuit against RCA.
That's right. I had forgotten to include that. You are absolutely correct. Thank you very much for adding that point.
No problem. It's just a sore spot with me.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Armstrong was a real hero, and he really got screwed.
But otherwise, thanks a lot for the presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome. Any questions? Any comments? Any? Remember this. I'm in New Jersey, and it is tomato season. So if you didn't like the talk, you're permitted to respond.
Jonathan, Steve, thank you very, very much. It's very fascinating. I knew a little bit about the Sarnoff Library and through my association with Alex Magoon, but to get a story of what's the whole thing was really great. I have to run, so I will leave this for everybody else to ask questions and talk about other subjects and so forth. Again, thanks very much. We really appreciate your contribution.
Well, I enjoyed giving it. It's been a lot of fun. So you're
great.
You're a good gang.
Jonathan, I'm curious about that RCA solid state TV set.
Yes.
You showed before.
Yeah.
Wasn't that like a couple of years after the Philco Safari solid state?
I am not sure. I don't know. It was purely a demonstration set. It was pre-tuned to one single channel, I think either channel 3 or 4, and it was purely a demonstration. I'd have to look up the date it was made. I don't know about the Philco.
Jonathan, it's Scott.
Hi, Scott.
That transistor TV you have there, that's the first transistor TV ever made. It was a laboratory model. It was demonstrated, and it was in the mid 1950s that was built.
That's right. You're an RCA veteran of sorts, aren't you?
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Scott.
Could I make a comment?
Please.
I think you said the NTSC standard was adopted in 1946 after World War II.
At least the recent one, there was an earlier standard that was used for the pre-war TV, which never really got off the ground because the FCC commandeered all the frequencies for military communication, and the manufacturing capacity for the had to go to the war effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe I read that they approved it in like spring of 1941, and they started giving out licenses for TV stations to start on July 1st, 1941. And then when the war started, they, the stations that were still broadcasting, were already broadcasting, were allowed to continue, but they didn't have any newer ones until after the war was over with.
I think I understand the standard changed in some small details after the war. For instance, the number of scan lines or something like that was altered.
I don't know. I know they dropped to channel 1 at some point. There.
Channel 1 was dropped. Channel 1 was dropped, I think, in the late 40s or something.
Yeah, I used to.
The 525 line standard was actually done in 1941 by the first NTSC. RCA had used some succession of standards with fewer scan lines before that, but the standard, the scanning standard for use after the war was adopted in 1941. It's just that once the war came, there was no longer any production of TV receivers.
That's right. And by the way, an interesting thing about that AR-88 receiver is that it weighs 100 pounds. You know why? Because all the metal parts are steel, since aluminum was being rationed for aircraft use.
Okay.
Boy, that's a son of a gun to move.
I bet. Well, I would like to just say that I enjoyed this very much myself, and I also thank you for doing it.
And I appreciate the little additions and corrections that I've gotten from this gang who are real TV freaks.
What happened to the RCA building, the RCA Labs building?
It now belongs to Stanford Research Institute International. They now do a whole bunch of contract R&D, a lot of government stuff, some stuff for the War Department. I'm not too good in newspeak, so I still call it that. But yeah, they took it over as a research lab. In fact, I visited their lobby a couple of days ago in order to see what some exhibits they had, which were carried over from RCA, and also some stuff they borrowed from us at the Sarnoff Museum, because I wanted to be more complete about some of these things. Yeah, it's an ongoing nonprofit company.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. Very much appreciated.
Well, thank you for all your comments and help with it. Yes.
Yeah, you made a comment about it being tomato season, and I want to say that your presentation would not ever bring any desire to throw tomatoes, especially if they're New Jersey tomatoes, because they are some of the best in the world.
Absolutely. I just ate one for dinner. But yeah. By the way, I had an aunt, a great aunt actually, who was an opera singer, and she spent some time in Italy at La Scala, and she said that if if the audience paid good money for a ticket and they got a lousy performance, they did in fact throw vegetables. Of course, never at her, but that is not pure mythology.
Hey, Jonathan, I got an update on the transistor TV.
Oh, please.
You have at the museum. All right, I have a copy of Alex Magoon's book on television right here.
Oh, yeah.
And he mentions the all transistor TV set. And he has a picture of it on the test bench
Oh,
right
yeah,
there
that's
in
the
his
beast.
book. And the date is 1952.
Okay.
And the one of the inventors is Gerald Herzog. They mention in Alex's book. It was 5-inch CRT.
Yeah.
37 high frequency transistors, weighed 27 pounds, and received one channel 15 miles from the transmitting antenna.
Yep.
So that's the first prototype transistor TV, 1952.
Thank you very much. I got. Oh, by the way, another book that's very useful is Empire of the Air, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with.
Yes.
I can give you the full bibliography of it if anyone needs it. Of course, that's much more interested, much more obsessed with the soap opera aspect of all these competitions and patent battles and stuff like that, rather than the the science. But it's still something excuse me, something I drew on.
Oh, that's a wonderful program. In fact, PBS made a TV show out of it. I think it was an ongoing series, and it's wonderful. Actually, everybody should watch it.
I think I did watch some episodes of it. Yes, I did. Yeah, now I do remember. Thank you.
That first transistor set appeared in a brief article in, I believe, Popular Science or one of the similar magazines. And the interesting thing is they quote the RCA scientist as saying it's only a prototype and we don't expect it to replace tubes.
Well, it would be a long time before it would. The early transistors were not all that good. I have a Tektronix 547 oscilloscope of my own at home, and we also have one at the museum, which someone donated, which used to be part of the RCA lab. And it's an interesting hybrid in that the transistors handle the sort of light duty stuff, but all the tricky critical stuff is vacuum tubes. And in fact, there's no way to get from the outside into the inside into a transistor state without first going through tubes, because they are immune to overload voltage and that kind of thing. They protect. I mean, puncturing the gate of a FET is a lot easier than puncturing a couple of millimeters of absolutely nothing.
That's a really good point, because you know, you can blow a transistor right off of the right
out of its socket
or whatever. Yeah, but you know, a tube, you put 120 volts on the grid, it doesn't really care. It might go red for a minute, but that's about it.
Yeah. Also, I work in industrial RF, where we use RF for plasmas and stuff like that, where the impedance of the load can vary considerably or accidentally change suddenly. And especially for experimental stuff, we use vacuum tube RF generators, because if it sees a serious impedance mismatch, it can, as Timex said, take a licking but keep on ticking. With the transistors, they've added so many protective circuits that it's very hard to get the plasma lit in the first place, because the impedance when it's not lit is very different from the impedance when it's lit. And so how do you get around that discontinuity? But yeah, they manage to. I mean, but it's not trivial.
Hey, Jonathan, I've got a question about your interactions with visitors to the Sarnoff Museum.
Yeah.
And it's how often do you get visitors who were eager to paint David Sarnoff as a villain? And how do you respond to that attitude?
Well, I haven't had too many who present him as a villain. I point out a couple of his faults. For instance, one of the things I often mention is that one reason he had to live in New Jersey was that he needed to rent the Zeppelin hangar at Lakehurst, because no other building was voluminous enough to contain his ego. He was somewhat akin to Steve Jobs. In other words, he was a whiz when it came to running the company and inventing and choosing inventions and running a business, but he also could be a stinker. Yeah, I don't feel it's my duty to completely defend him. If the accusation has substance, I mean, if it's something totally made up, obviously I'll try to correct it. But if they point out one of his faults, hey, I'm not. This is not a like a religion where he's our patron saint.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Jonathan Ed Melbourne here. Do you recall the museum receiving about 6 or 8 months ago a prototype of an early RCA video disc player?
We have quite a few video disc players, and I think we did get one. Yes.
Yeah, this I sent that to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
And that come by courtesy of Dave Arlen, whom you may or may not know, which is a friend of and on the board of the Early Television Museum.
Oh, really? Is he
And
also
myself.
connected with the New Jersey Antique Radio Club?
I don't think so.
Oh, well, that was very nice of him.
Yeah. So anyway, we tried to find some discs. But
we've got zillions of discs.
Well, not these were not production discs. These
Oh,
were
okay.
made specifically. This was before the production machine. It was completely designed after that pre-production machine.
Okay.
that,
Yeah, some of the early prototypes did not have that sheath, that heavy cardboard sheath
Yeah.
around the disc, and you obviously want to handle it very carefully, touching only the edges and that kind of thing.
Well, this was one of the first models that did have the caddy.
Oh yeah,
But, it was a different dimension than the one that was the production caddy.
yeah. I think
anyway.
I think I now I think I remember the set.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a boat anchor. It's heavy. You would remember it.
Yep.
Okay.
It was also known that David Saranoff, he was a patent hoarder. He said, "We don't pay royalties, we collect them." And he meant it.
Okay. Well, in a couple of instances, he was forced to pay a few royalties, but for the most part, you're right.
Also, it was discussed a little earlier about what our collections, what artifacts may be worth and all of that.
Yeah.
I try to downplay that for one main reason and all of that. Many years ago, RCA published the proposal to the FCC for colored television in June 25th, 1953, that red colored book. It was real thick.
Yeah.
And I had one of those copies there that was mint condition. One time I had a father and son that paid me a visit one time. And anyway, it came to that book and I said, well, this was RCA's proposal to the FCC for colored television. It's a valuable book. There's not too many of these still running around. Well, I didn't realize until about a month later that book had disappeared. Apparently, when I had my back turned, they stole that book because I touted it as a valuable book.
Oh,
So
weren't they shits?
Pardon me?
Weren't they shits?
Yeah. There's valuable items in our collections, and I try to downplay that. I tried just to stay away from the subject, because when you start pointing out certain items that are worth, $10,000 or $5,000 or anything like that, you're kind of opening yourself up to something, unsavory if you get the wrong person in there.
You mean sticky fingers?
Yes, exactly. So I try to keep stuff like that. So, they were talking about the value of it. Well, it's nice that we know what they are, but to the average person coming in, you want to downplay stuff like that.
Well, I don't get into that, but now I'll be even more conscious of it, because we certainly don't need that kind of crap going on.
Well, you never know what's going on these days, but it just kind of got me. A father and son came here, and I lost the book. I've since replaced it. I've got 3 copies of it now, but that one was like brand new, and I just hated
Well,
to find that book, and I couldn't find it. And
Jonathan is
David. Yes, go ahead, please.
I've become a Latter-day fan, or victim of CED players. I have 4 of them at the house here and way too many discs laying around. And I can see why that thing was one of the great train wrecks of all time for RCA. It was just the worst possible design. And I watched a Laserdisc last night, Apollo 13 on Laserdisc.
Yeah.
And they were all at the same time. And RCA had no chance with that thing.
Yeah, I think the reason they chose that technology was because the discs themselves could be pressed with a system not unlike the one that's used to press regular audible phonograph records.
Actually, if you go through some of the CED history and some of the CED websites, they're using the exact same long play LP record presses.
Yeah.
For these modern CEDs, which granted had, substantially more information on the platter, and they got it to work, but if you look cross-eyed at the thing, it's not going to play.
Exactly. And the idea is that it's just to get the thing to track and all that is just not at all a trivial matter. It was really. Oh, by the way, the vinyl has to have added to it a lot of carbon so that you can get the capacitive effect.
Well, then it had to have a silicone coating on top of it.
A silicone coating, yeah.
For the cartridge and the needle to float on.
Yes, that's right.
And over the years, 40 years later, that silicone's hardened up.
It's not silicone, it's silicone.
And you try and play the thing. The standard now is you get a CED, you put it in, and you play it a couple of times to see if you can loosen it up.
Yeah.
To play. The numbers I've seen was that it was a $600 million loss for RCA.
I've heard numbers along those lines also. Yeah, it was a bust. We had a special exhibit a little while ago based on that whole technology, and at first I brought in my own microscope, but it wasn't quite good enough. We borrowed a microscope from the biology department so that you could see these micro grooves. Well, the problem is that you have to do a reflection microscope. Obviously, a transmission microscope won't do it. So this one from the biology department was set up to do that. It was much more modern. My microscope is 1920s vintage.
The number I've heard is that for every groove on a standard 33 LP,
yeah,
the CED had 47 grooves in that same space.
That sounds reasonable. Yeah, that number sounds plausible. Yeah.
And to try and get some little cartridge to track inside of that thing, make the sync change, from through the frame. Like, what were they thinking?
Well, of course, DVDs also they have to the sensor has to track these micro grooves, but they've managed to do that too.
No, the other thing with the CED concept and the platter concept was that as you start, I forget if they went from the outside in or the inside out.
On the RCA, they went from the outside, just like on a regular phonograph.
But then the dynamics are going to change in speed as you move towards the center, and they have to compensate for that.
I think what they do is on some of these systems, the turntable RPM is higher when you're near the center than when you're near the rim. That does, I believe that's true. I'm not sure whether the Selectavision RCA disc does that, but that is in fact the practice with a number of digital discs now.
Certainly
No,
the
it does
laser
not.
disc did.
No, it does.
You know,
Yeah.
for me, when the thing works, it's just a ton of fun. You
Yeah.
know, 40-year-old technology that sort of works.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them are quite good movies.
And actually, a lot of those movies are, you know, pre-director's cuts. They're right out of theater.
Yeah,
The original presentation.
yeah,
And a lot of them are just, you know, 16mm prints that they borrowed from, you know, the syndicators. You can see the punch marks in, you know, up in the corner for the real change. It's they did that for $1.98 getting those titles.
you're talking about the RCA ones?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, this whole program was really a tragedy for the company.
Well, you know, thank you for your comments, and I won't bore anybody else with CED.
Okay.
You know, a little earlier, you were talking about that first fully transistorized television
Yeah.
that RCA developed. Kind of brings to mind, if you remember back in 1969, RCA brought out that little 9-inch black and white that looked like a little miniature floor console set. You know.
Oh, yes, I think we may have one.
I have several of those, but what more importantly, the guy that designed that set was Jim Reinhardt up there in Indianapolis. He built some prototype sets. Well, they made it in 1969, 1970, but they did not make an issue of it in 1971. But in 1972, they were thinking about bringing it back, and because they thought, well, it was designed to be a kitchen set or sold in jewelry stores and such.
Oh,
That's what
no,
Jim tells me.
no, Julian, that on eBay is a salesman's sample.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I've got a point of that. We've discussed that. That irritates me when I see that.
Yeah, I
touted
know.
as a salesman sample.
Yeah.
Well, this one guy on eBay one day had one. He was just touted. It's a salesman sample. Oh yeah, it's wonderful. So I sent him an email. I said it's not a salesman sample. It's just a folklore. He sent me a very nasty email back saying that, oh, it's a salesman sample and I can prove it. And I said, okay, prove it. So he sent me this URL on it, and I tapped on the URL, and guess who wrote the article on that? It was my article. And only in there did I say it's commonly touted as a salesman.
Yes, right, yeah.
And anyway, I said, if you're intelligent enough to read, what you obviously cannot read, I said, you'll notice that I'm the author of it. If you read the article, nowhere in there does it. Well, I never heard from him again, and the set disappeared a couple days later. But that was one of my pet peeves.
Yeah, very rare that you get a chance to nail somebody. If I might divert a little bit, I have a somewhat similar story. It's a little bit off topic. The Cronach Corporation, as you know, was into the business of making solar photovoltaic panels with amorphous silicon. The hope was that because they were about half the price, while the efficiency was only half that of crystalline silicon, the price was so much less that you could just put up more of them. But eventually, the price of crystalline dropped to the point where it didn't survive. But in any case, we had a factory where we're producing our panels. And we use an RF excited plasma to deposit the silicon. And I notified the operators, if you have any real problems, give me a phone call. I'll whenever it is, and I'll jump in the car and come down here and try to help. So one night in the middle of the night, it must have been 2 o'clock or something, the phone rings, and the guy says, I'm on the shift at the factory down in Trenton, and I can't get RF circuit number 4 to come on. I said, oh, well, maybe I better come and help you. So I jump into the car, I go down there, I see on number 4, there's a toggle switch which says standby and on. I said, we have to take that switch and switch it from standby to on. And then the signal goes through the RF amplifier and you were able to get the plasma to go. How would you know that? Well, it's in the manual. How the hell do you know what's in the manual? I wrote the manual.
It's just, there's just people like that,
Yeah.
but what I was gonna say about the solid state set, RCA back there in the early 70s, they were touting with color television and the XL100s. And they were considering bringing that little set back, and they were going to bring it back as a solid state set.
Yeah.
So Jim made 6 prototypes of that thing, and 3 of them were destroyed, but 3 still exist, and I have 1 of them.
Oh, wow.
But anyway, they didn't go along with building that set because they were still trying to get in, make everybody get a color TV.
Yeah.
And that a 1972 black and white set just really wouldn't cut it. But the only difference in that little set that I've got, the prototype, it was identical to the others, except for one thing. It had doors in the front that would close, just like the console,
Oh,
which
yeah.
was kind of unique. But that
Well-
was a little solid state set that never made it with RCA and all of that because they were just trying to tout color.
Yeah.
But still, when I see those sets and people tout them as a sales, like salesmen didn't carry cast iron, miniature cast iron stoves and pianos, and that's what they made books for.
Yeah.
Common sense would tell you, but okay, and very often in eBay, salesman sample. But anyway,
Yeah.
I
No,
just
I-
find it amusing.
I have a 1978 RCA black and white 19-inch portable,
Yeah.
sort of portable.
It's got a handle on it, so it makes it portable. I know.
Well, it's got a catch in the back, you pick it up.
Yeah.
The thing, I forget where I bought it, probably found it at Kutztown, 10, 12 years ago. It's now up at a museum in Bethlehem, an industrial museum run, and it's in a display right now by Service Electric on the history of Service Electric cable TV
Yeah.
there in Bethlehem. And it's running. It just, I pulled it out, gave it a deoxit bath, cleaned it
Yep.
up, and it just, stupid thing runs. And it's so late in 1978, I cannot find a schematic for it. I had to open it up and figure out what was going on inside there. But it's up there on a little, rolling cart. They plug it in, turn it on every day.
You can't find a Sam's Photo Factor or anything like that.
I can't find a thing about this set. There is no mention of it. And it's kind of weird in that RCA in the day, 70s, had their tuner arrangement side by side like this,
Yeah.
UHF, VHF. This one's vertical. And, or excuse me, it's backwards. RCA did vertical. This one is horizontal. And I can't figure out where this set came from, but the dumb thing works.
Yeah.
45 years later, it just like it's like brand new.
Not recapped.
New, not recapped, nothing.
By the way, that 621 TS from 1946, I restored that. I had a recap, and it is working.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Absolutely perfect.
Well, that has created a serious that sort of thing has created a serious problem. High fidelity audio suffers from an absolutely fundamentally insurmountable technological problem, and that is they solved all their problems 60 years ago. The audio quality of amplifiers made 60 years ago is far better than the ear can detect any defect. So and these were built to last forever. So how are they going to sell more hi-fi electronics? By inventing a non-problem for which they prescribe a non-solution.
Well, remember 60 years ago when TV excuse me, I got a timer here. It ducks out. There we go.
Yeah.
Remember 60 years ago in the 50s when TV transmission was the old coaxial cable or microwave.
Yeah.
The audio followed on an AT&T long lines audio circuit. It
Yeah.
not travel with the video. So you got to, okay, you got cross-country video and you've got cross-country AT&T 5K audio.
Yeah.
And that went in the 70s.
No, I'm talking about hi-fi, for instance, to play records or to play
okay.
FM radio, not hi-fi TV.
Okay.
I'm just talking about the general field of hi-fi audio. They as I say, they have to invent non-problems for which they can prescribe non-solutions. I had a neighbor who was into this high-end audio stuff, and he told me he once showed me that he bought new cables to run from the amplifier to the loudspeakers, and they were as fat as a garden hose. And he told me he'd gotten a real bargain. They're normally supposed to be $3,000, and he got them for only $1,500. And I said, well, buddy, what's so special about them? Well, they're made of oxygen-free high conductivity copper, which is equivalent to 1/4 of one gauge size, by the way. But they are non-dispersive. And I said, by non-dispersive, you mean the same they do in optics, so that the high frequencies and low frequencies travel at the same speed? Yeah. And I said, okay. Well, let's take our slide rules out of our rectums and do a little ballpark calculation here. The speed of the signal is in the cable is 2/3 the speed of light, or 2 × 10⁸ meters per second. So it takes it about maybe 10 nanoseconds to get from the amplifier to the speaker. And let's say your dispersion would be 10%. That was 1 nanosecond of difference in arrival time between the high and low frequencies. And you're going to hear that with your ear?
Oh, and don't forget your cryogenically frozen AC outlets or something like that.
Yeah, I know. Well, he was having problems that we lived not too far from an AM broadcast station, and he was getting crap into his preamp, which was a vacuum tube preamp. And he said, and so I suggested that he run a ground stake and a piece of at least 1 inch wide copper ribbon from the chassis into the ground. So he was on the first floor, so it would not be difficult. And also on the lid of the preamp, it was painted, and there were only six screws holding the lid on it. So you better scrape the paint away and put some copper braid there to form a good RF shield, and to put some bayonet shields around the tubes. And he said, wouldn't you think that when one spends $3,000 on a preamplifier, he may presume that the manufacturer did a proper job? And I said, you may presume whatever you want, but it did not negate the Maxwell equations.
There's a lot of funny stuff out there.
Yeah.
When did RCA stop making black and white portables? Would that have been 79, 80 somewhere, or do they, those plastic cabinets,
Well, remember in 1980 they went kaput, so I don't think it could have been much after that anyway. The RCA trademark persisted, and other people made things with the RCA brand on them. I really don't know, but I think in terms of conveniently portable little sets, the black and whites continued for a long time after color was established.
The set I have loaned in the museum in Bethlehem has a date code of November 1978.
Okay.
Boy, back there in the late 70s, early 80s, I used to buy every black and white 19-inch portable that I could get my hands on, like Zeniths and RCAs, for the simple reason bingo games were real popular in East Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
Before they outlawed them and got the lottery in.
Yeah.
But they would have me set up these bingo parlors with, they had a little TV camera on the ping pong balls as they would come up,
Oh, yes.
from, B4 and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I was using them for video monitors. Plus, I built my own RF modulators, for channel 3 or channel
Yeah.
4.
Yeah.
And I'd find a modulator out of a VCR or something like that, and I used to build those things. But
Oh,
I
it
set
sounds
up a
like
lot
quite a
of
little project.
I set up a lot of bingo parlors around there so that you have these TV monitors they could see,
They could
as
see
those
they could
things
see
turned up.
see the little number balls popping up. Yeah.
But yeah, I've made
That's
money,
cute.
but now there's no need for any of that stuff. Now they can probably do it on their cell phone now.
Yeah. Well, technology moves on.
Yeah, but my thanks to Service Electric, the cable system up in Allentown,
Oh, yeah.
for putting on this display at this local museum, which is on the site of the old Bethlehem Steel Company.
Oh, yeah.
It's a really fun display.
Isn't
And
it?
they've done a great job.
Isn't that the company that has ads on TV claiming that they were the first to demonstrate cable TV?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I-
They act as though all they had was an antenna up on top of the hill and a piece of coax coming down. I think there were a few 6AK5s involved.
Yeah, I forget the name of the owner of the company, but they claim they are the first cable system.
Yeah.
I've got an old Phonovision cable box somewhere,
Yeah.
or one of those early cable boxes
Yeah.
that you would have. That
Yeah.
Oh, was that the Zenith Vision system?
I can't remember. I picked this one up. It's a real crude, kind of odd looking, very unusual. I have to dig that thing up. It's up there in one of my shelves though, but it's an early cable box of some description.
Well, I believe Phone Vision was actually an over-the-air thing.
Yeah.
That could have been Zenith. I have if you look in an owner's manual to a 1961 black and white Zenith set, in the back page, it's touting Zenith has invented a Phonovision or something like that. They're talking about how it'll be, distributed on a cable system or something. And,
I think it may have been an over-the-air thing with a converter box of some sort. Don't know where you got the channel frequency.
Zenith Phonovision was over the air, and the reason it was called Phonovision is because the decryption authorization would be sent to your unit over your telephone line.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Wayne.
you remember in cable systems, they would have for your pay channels like home box office, they would, on those channels that have suppressed sync on it.
Yeah.
And anyway, they had these little notch filters that they used to put up on the pole and all of that. And I learned how to take those things apart and tune them to where they'd pass signals all the way through, that they'd think that they had the little notch filter up there. Oh, yeah, they can't get that, but I'd detune them. You'd have to heat them up, and it's got a sleeve on it.
Where did this filter live? On the utility pole outside the house, or
Yeah, I mean, it was in series with your cable input.
Yeah. So you had
It
to you had to climb up the pole to get at it?
Well, what you'd do is when the cable guy would come around, you'd slip him $5 or $10 that, hey, use this instead or something.
Oh.
Or let's see, they had one that would filter out that noise that they would put on. It's a notch filter.
Oh, yeah.
It was very, very narrow bandwidth, and you'd tune that thing out. And anyway, I could take those filters and then make them into a filter, so to speak. You could have about 3 or 4 little slugs and miniature slugs, and you could sit there and play with them and detune them and put them back in the thing that think that you had it. But that's all old technology.
Yeah.
You know?
didn't they use some kind of signal inversion technology?
Yes. Yeah, it was a suppressed, the suppressed sync was a little later, but then they put a noise in the, on that particular channel, and you had to filter it out. And they made
yeah.
these little chrome
The-
cylinder things.
This was to
Yeah,
prevent people.
the cable systems at one point were using a mix of different techniques on different channels. Where I lived in the Chicago suburbs, the analog cable system in the 80s used suppressed sync on most of the channels, but Disney, for some reason, insisted on using the filters and the trap to remove the interference, that narrowband interference that was put in their channel. And I think the reason was that hackers had developed circuits to circumvent the sync suppression. So there were people who would buy black market boxes to get the subscription channels for free.
Oh, this was the way. This was to prevent people from cheating and getting the paid channels without paying the premium.
Right.
Exactly.
And there was one bad thing as a TV engineer, which was obvious to me right away. The signal that used the trap that put interference in the middle of the band, like at 2 megahertz. When you look at what the frequency response and time response equivalents are, that sharp trap in the middle of the channel has a phase reversal from below 2 megahertz to above 2 megahertz, which is equivalent to a very short-term ghost.
Yeah.
And it was plain as the nose on your face for somebody looking for it and knew what it was. Which meant all the edges on the Disney Channel had a double edge, like a very short ghost.
It's amazing how far along that stuff has come from what it was about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
We're talking about the dollar value of some artifacts. I've got a Craig Stan NBC color TV, tin battery operated toy truck that is one of my prized pieces, but over the years, I've seen ones in rather poor condition and corroded because the batteries leaked in them, going for over $1,000. And I, sat that market out and eventually paid close to $400 for the one I've got, which comes with the original box and is not corroded and actually runs. But I think since the time I bought that, the ones I've seen in similar or poor condition, the market has just dropped and they've been like $200 or less. So, my feeling is, like everybody else has expressed, that it's not the dollars that matter, it's the artifact.
One of my favorite little RCA sets was that 14-inch color set that RCA made. It was all tubes. And back in 1967, they made that with a UHF dial. It was looked like a radio dial on top of the set. Do you remember those? That's one of my favorite little sets that I always liked.
Yeah. Guys, I think I'm gonna have to wrap it up. So if you will, if you'll excuse me, I think I'm pretty tired. I've been practicing all day and all that. So if you will
Yeah.
excuse me, I think I'm gonna drop out. And I've appreciated all your comments, and it's been fun talking with you all, and maybe I'll attend the next meeting.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, for your contributions. We love having it.
All right, well,
Yeah, thanks.
okay,
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan.
you're very
I have to go
welcome.
to church tomorrow.
I guess you do, yep. Okay, bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, folks.
I got a fast message for
Signing
you.
off.
Are you still there, Julian?
Yes.
Yeah, I've been playing around with a program off of NBTV website, and they have a program out there that will drive Peter Yancey's receiver. I've
Oh,
been playing-
really?
Yeah, I've got a picture on my receiver from the program. So you might check that out. It's called Free NBTV, FREE-NBTV. There's a million
NB.
parameters though. That's why it works with Peter Yancey's. You set the
Free.
pixels.
Let me write that down. Free NBT.
V, narrowband TV.
Oh,
Oh.
free NBT TV.
Yeah, it's not on their software list, but it's on a discussion thing out there where the guy has a link to download.
Hmm.
If you have any problem, send me a note on Video Karma.
Okay.
On Video Karma, the latest mechanical TV thread out there, on the very bottom, you can see some outputs I got from that program.
Okay. Sure
Now, you
would be
prob-
nice to find one of his cameras though.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, Dave, you can play with that also because
I'd love to keep in touch with you, because I've got the complete kit,
yeah,
but I'm not happy with it because the image I get is just very high contrast. There's no grayscale in there. There's nothing between bright and dark. And I'm not sure what that's all about.
yeah, I'm not sure either, but there's a contrast button on that software. So you might be able to play with contrast with that software.
I'm using those, those discs that come from Britain, and it's just not working right.
Yeah, well, the one from Britain is 32 by 32. This
Yep.
one you key in the number of pixels and the number of lines. So I put 24 and 24.
Yeah.
Now the only thing is the frame per second. Peter says 30, but I had to start at like 35 and hit the minus key down 0.5 at a time until I found a sweet spot where it was working.
Yeah, my problem is I just can't create anything other than a very high contrast image. That's
Right.
it. Like the old Peter Yancey test A.
Right,
signal.
right.
That's the best I can do, and that's pretty accurate. But nothing in between. I'm not sure if it's a photocell issue or what it is.
Yeah, I was having problems with my complete system. I got a camera and receiver, and I wanted to isolate whether it was the camera with the problem or the receiver. So this gives me a chance to play with the receiver. Then once I get that working, I could go back to playing with the camera again.
And in my case, I'm just working here on my workbench, and it may not be enough light, but I do have one of those old movie light bars. I can pound some light in there, which I think may be a part of the issue, that this thing needs a sack full of light to operate.
Now this program will use either a JPEG or an AVI video. So if you want to put like an A out there or an R, you just make your JPEG 24 by 24 and give it that. We hit the key for your input, you just go to your directory and pick the a.jpg or whatever, then you can just have that A play.
I'll see what I can pull off
Yeah. Okay.
and throw it out there for everybody to look at. But having one of these things sort of operating is just a ton of fun.
So anyway, that's a college student that wrote that software. So the latest version is 2022.
I love your neon sign there, Radio Television Supply Company.
Yeah, that's
that-
actually off of the movie He Walks at Night. See that TV? That TV is a Hollywood model. There's an ad for that TV out in the magazines, but no one has ever seen the actual TV. The TV was
No.
used in that movie. He Walks by Night. The guy's a cop killer. He robs TV stations and kills cops.
Oh, I've got a neon sign similar to that. It says Radio Television Repair. I think, or radio TV service. I need to dig that thing out. Maybe on our next meet, I'll light that thing up and put it behind me there.
Hey,
I love things like that.
I've got a Philco radio TV neon just over there, not in view right now, but maybe I'll take a photo and do the same thing and hide it behind me.
You want to sell it?
I know. I know.
Boy, up there at Kutztown there, Rain Butengall up there, he had a beautiful Crosley thing there for Crosley when they made those color radios. It had a round thing, like, it would rotate and it looked like colors were going around. But of course, everything he has, if it's worth $5, he wants 50, and if it's worth 50, he wants 500, and if it's worth 500, he wants 5,000. Well, he wanted about 5,000 for that Crosley thing there.
Well, that's Ron. It's you get used to him. Just deal with it. But did you see that little RCA kind of tube thing he had in a shell, in an RCA shell?
Yes, I did. I'm trying to, now that you mentioned, I forgot what it is, but he had something really special there.
And it was not for sale. He wasn't selling it. But if you look back through Video Karma, it turns out it was an odd little add-on to an RCA film chain, the TP projector.
Oh, yes.
And it was a light tube, basically, with a mirror on the end of it that you could put, like, if you were a jeweler trying to sell a watch, you could put a little tiny display next to the film chain. You didn't have to go to the studio. Just put it on this little slab, aim the mirror, and it would show up on the film chain. It was like, what was RCA thinking when they built this thing? But it worked.
I knew it was part of a film chain right there,
It
but
was-
I
It was not part of the studio. It was part of a film chain.
it was a film chain. I've never seen it. I've never seen one before, but it was obvious what it is.
It had a mirror, but you had to manually flip the mirror back. A watch on this side and engagement ring on the other side.
I did ask him how much did he want for it. He did price it to me, but it was, $3,500 or something.
Yeah,
like that,
he wouldn't even give me a price. He changed his mind by the time I talked to him.
Well, he knew that I wouldn't pay it anyway, so the sky's the limit,
Yeah,
Did you see that steam engine thing that he had there?
I did not.
Those little mock-up steam engines, you put those little pellets in it and boil.
Yeah, the
wheel
little
in the dirt.
miniatures.
A little miniature. He had a big one there. That thing had a cylinder on it, probably about a 12-inch. It was a big one, but it was mounted on a board. I mean, it was a really nice piece there, but I didn't even bother to ask him because, you know, it'd be high, but I've never seen one that large. But he had a big one there. That or he had it sold, or he brings stuff up there to give to other people. It's usually pre-sold sometimes. And I don't know where he finds that stuff, but he can come up with the darnest, neatest stuff you've ever seen. But my gosh, it's unaffordable.
The guy's been around forever, since, you know, the old Antique Radio Classified. He's doing this forever. Bless his heart. Good for him. I'm glad he finds this stuff as opposed to it going to the trash. You know, okay, fine. He makes a lot of money. I don't care. Just keep it coming out.
Yeah, he comes up with some neat stuff, but but there's a lot of, you know, a lot of my stuff. I just wonder if it wasn't for me, how much of my stuff would have ended up in the landfill. And
I don't know if I'm getting a mental picture of what you described with the film chain, but I think I've got a RCA catalog that mentions an accessory for doing small item televising using the film chain, and I think they actually describe what the field of view is, like 12 by 16 inches or something like that.
No, Wayne, you're exactly right. And I think I have seen that ad, which shows an image of the thing Ron had, complete with the RCA cover and RCA television across the side. But it was a little side piece to an RCA film chain. Now, where it fit in, you know, if you had to take the slide projector out, I don't know. But
yeah, it sounds like you would have a T set up for the Vidicon camera, the slide chain, and the 16 millimeter film.
Well, yeah,
and this accessory would then turn the 90-degree path left or right, so it would make a cross shape that you could select either the slide projector or this thing or the film chain.
This thing was a light tube with a mirror on the end that went from this side to this side. So it didn't involve the slides at all. It actually looked like it was, and I grew up in the 70s with RCA film chains. It looked like it you would put it in place of the slide projector instead of the slide projector. It was bizarre. And it was it was a standard TK, what was it, 27, color film chain pickup, with a TP60 projectors, but just this little odd thing off, growing to the side.
Well, but the standard film chain setup would have both the film projector and the slide projector, isn't that right?
Yes, it would, but I can't figure out where this thing fit into this. It had to go in. It had to go in, so something had to give way.
It was part of something.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that you would stick it in between the Vidicons and the mirror box that normally switch between the film and the slides. So this would be like a pre-switch to go to the live platform.
Yeah, I've seen recently, maybe on Eyes of a Generation, an RCA, tear sheet, product sheet on this exact same thing, but I can't figure it out yet. Don't know where it fits in.
Okay, I haven't seen it on Eyes of a Generation. I'll have to look for it.
Well, I'll see if I can dig out that photo and put it up somewhere where my hero Wayne can see it.
Yeah.
In my collection there, I've got a TK-26 out there. What is it? It's a little box camera. Goes as part of a TK-26 thing there, and something else I've got.
I think that was the black and white camera that went with that film chain. The 27, I think, was the color.
I have to look at it. I've got it out there in the garage, which I can't get to at the moment, but I have to dig that thing out. I've got a lot of odds and ends. I do have two Iconoscope TK-20s. I have two of them, and of that. And I'd just like to get some more. I need to find a projector. I had a chance to get one of the projectors one time, and for some reason I didn't get it from the guy there. But anyway,
the TP-16, I think it was.
Yeah, it was it's labeled RCA on it. It was probably a Bell and Howell projector.
I could still thread one of those things in about 9 seconds.
You had to.
You just throw the news film on and thread it and let it rip. I don't care if it falls on the floor.
One of the secretaries in my church there, she said that she worked in a college there and she threaded all of the videotape machines there. Said she could really do a good job of it. She could do it blindfolded, those Sonys. Well, I think it's time.
The other thing about that little live stage is it would have required an awful lot of light. So that's another reason for it not to be very big.
Oh, yeah. Well, in a film chain and all of that, you had that 1,000-watt light bulb, lamp there in the projector. So that gave you all the light you needed there for, especially an iconoscope. But anyways, more stuff I need to start digging out there. But well, folks, I'm going to hit it here. And boy, what a great presentation tonight. It's great chatting with you guys, and appreciate everything. And there will be more later, I guess. So
good night.
There's not a lot of people left.
No, and I'm about to sign off. I got an antique car show tomorrow, about 40 miles from here, so I'm fading away.
Okay.
Well, thank you for all of you being here. As a board member from the museum, we appreciate you and encourage this every month. All righty. Good night, everybody.
Good night.